You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. It was a rather curious weekend because I got to the end and found that there was not a whole lot of breaking news on Saturday. There wasn't a massive amount that just knocked over the entire world on Friday. And then we got into Sunday and yeah, I was wrong. There was actually some news over the weekend. So Sunday morning shows, for those of you that don't follow the political landscape time and time again, used to be the podcasts of the media world. Used to be where you would have some type of host or anchor that you knew, that you respected, who would sit down with a particular candidate in studio. It was almost always in studio, at least. And then they would ask some tough questions. And they'd ask a little slice of life questions. Really, it was the podcasting world before podcasting was a thing in politics. And you would get some really great stuff. And now a lot of those agencies and those media outlets, ABC, CBS, and so on, they ain't doing so hot. But I tell you what, the Sunday specials are still just fantastic for finding content. Mainly because if you are on the left, right now that means Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Bernie Sanders getting in front of the country and really embarrassing themselves, which, you know, twist my arm, why don't you? And then if it's the Trump administration has done a pretty good job so far of basically sending somebody different to talk with Margaret Brennan every single week. And I made a joke to some of the ruthless podcast guys who are in the middle of their Hack Madness 2025, kind of a March Madness bracket for the worst people on the internet, that the reason I believe that Margaret Brennan from CBS should be the absolute worst, most garbage-filled hack of the year is that she has single-handedly humiliated herself, her network, and you know, those of us who work in media. Each and every Sunday she appears on the air. And that's why I'm going to go completely out of order and give producer Daniel and producer Allison just a smidge of a heart attack. We're going to go completely out of order because Margaret Brennan cannot fathom why the United States would directly tell Iran, dismantle your nuclear program. And, well, here you go.
Can you clarify, is the U.S. seeking the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program or verification like what President Obama put in place back in 2015 and President Trump pulled out of?
Full dismantlement.
All right, real quick here, just because I enjoy the nuts and bolts of this kind of a thing. So there are these things called leading questions. And leading questions are when you answer the question or put a different answer inside of the question in an attempt to throw off the person that you're asking questions to. So an objective journalist, or one who at least was pretending to be, would say, hey, is it true the Trump administration wants Iran to dismantle its nuclear weapons program and that it's been kind of forceful about that? That's how she would have asked it. No, she says, like Obama said was good and then Trump pulled out of? Is that what you did?
What President Obama put in place back in 2015 and President Trump pulled out of?
Full dismantlement. Okay. Iran has to give up its program in a way that the entire world can see. And this is, look, as President Trump has said, this is coming to a head. All options are on the table. And it is time for Iran to walk away completely from its desire to have a nuclear weapon. And they will not and cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapons program. That's enrichment,
to the
that is weaponization, and that it's strategic missile program. Can you only imagine? We've seen the death and destruction that they're doing through its proxies between Hezbollah, the Assad regime, the Houthis, and what have you. If they had nuclear weapons, the entire Middle East would explode in an arms race. That is completely unacceptable.
He finishes off to say, look, Iran needs to dismantle their nuclear program or else. And that is the Trump administration's peace through strength foreign policy. Now, Mike Waltz and foreign policy does come into play regarding what is a scandal. However, the size of the scandal is ridiculously exaggerated, and things do not smell right. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on and get Jeffrey Goldberg and The Atlantic involved. But there were other critical things that happened over the weekend. So appearing on the honorable mention for Sunday shows was Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, who appeared on a leftist pundit who I've debated before, the David Pakman show. and decided to say, you know what? We're just going to commit a federal crime in New York. Here's Kathy Hochul.
We're not going to allow this mass deportation. Where we will cooperate, and I did this even under the Biden administration. If you have a warrant, or you know someone's on a terrorism watch list, or committing crimes in their home country, or committing crimes here, that's a different category, and I will help you with those to protect everyone, whether they're newly arriving New Yorkers or whether they've lived here their entire lives. So that's real clear to me. But don't bleed over into going to schools and sensitive places. So our state policy, our state law does not allow for our state police to be involved in those situations. Now, what we have are some renegade counties in New York, because individual counties can sign a pact with ICE, and we have a lot of them, some on Long Island, some in upstate New York, where there's different political views. They are cooperating with their local police departments, but what I control is the state police, and they will not cooperate in that.
Yeah, so you can't do that. I've looked at the supposed New York laws that suggest that state police are not allowed to aid federal authorities if these authorities are looking for illegal immigrants in a particular area. Yeah, that's not a thing. If there is a suspected threat to national security, like a Tren de Aragua gang member, and they are suspected of being in a school, or they are suspected of being in a medical facility, or they are expected somewhere in New York, federal authorities have a right to go into New York and uphold national security, and local law enforcement is expected to cooperate. The idea that Kathy Hochul is like, we forbid anyone from it. Yeah, that's not allowed. That would be illegal. That's not a thing one can do. That's not necessarily under prosecutorial discretion. Now, the main story over on the left side of the aisle is that the old corporatist establishment Democrats are finally on their way out, not because they want to be, but because they have completely failed in every form of government. Well, to be fair, all of the Democrats have failed in their forms of government. But Chuck Schumer, man, he's got a plan. He's got a plan for those who maybe don't like the Trump administration, and he laid it all out on the line, man. Here's Chuck Schumer setting the record straight on what the Democrat plan is.
Our plan, which we're united on, is to make Donald Trump the quickest lame duck in modern history by showing how bad his policies are. He represents the oligarchs, as I said. He's hurting average people in every way. And we are, through oversight hearings, we're exposing what he's doing. Through the courts, which I mentioned, we've had some real success in. Through legislation and through organizing in all the districts throughout the country.
I did like how he said through legislation, Democrats haven't passed any laws. I love it so much. Schumer's having a rough time. He's having a rough time, and his plan is just to gripe about Trump and also claim that the Supreme Court not yet weighing in on the jurisdiction of federal judges. He's like, oh, that's a constitutional crisis, he says.
Do you agree, is the United States in a constitutional crisis?
Yes, I do, Kristen, and democracy is at risk. Look, Donald Trump is a lawless, angry man. He thinks he should be king. He thinks he should do whatever he wants, regardless of the law. And he thinks judges should just listen to him. Now, we have to fight that back in every single way.
Every single way. Maybe not the choice of words I would use, given the string of domestic terror incidents and fire bombings of things. But, anywho. Then Chuck Schumer, he gets out there on his high horse, and he's like, look, you hyper-progressive socialists, I ain't going anywhere, which is really sad, listening to the once powerful and strategic Chuck Schumer be reduced to the emperor without any clothes.
All right. Well, I do want to move to some of the discussions on Capitol Hill. Because of your decision, Leader Schumer, last week to clear the way to pass a Republican funding bill and avoid a government shutdown, you have faced calls from outside groups, even members of your own party, to step aside as minority leader. When asked about your future to town hall, Senator Michael Bennet said, quote, "It's important for people to know when it's time to go." Leader Schumer, are you feeling pressure to step down?
Look, I'm not stepping down. And let me just say this, Kristen. I knew when I cast my vote against against the government shutdown that there'd be a lot of controversy.
You notice he can't say unpopular. He's really between a rock and a hard place, or in this case, between Gaza and a hard place. That brings us over to Senator Bernie Sanders and his socialism and fighting of the oligarchy. And we'll talk about that in a second with the live stream crew. Radio crew, we'll see you in a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. Now, Bernie Sanders, got up with Jonathan Karl over at ABC, who was really nice to Bernie Sanders. I mean, they're all nice when it comes to a lot of Sunday specials. By the way, there are individuals over on the left that I've talked to that do these that are kind of nice to everyone. But Jonathan Karl, he just to the Democrats because, that's his job. And so Jonathan Karl asks Bernie Sanders about what he's doing, and Bernie's like, I'm rallying is fighting against Trump and his oligarchy and the rich people that I've said are coming for years. Not me. I am the good kind of millionaire in my lake house, and I've never worked a job in my life. But those people are bad. Bad. So then Karl asks him about, well, is there anything that Trump did that you liked?
Is there anything that you think Trump has done right?
Yeah. I mean, I think cracking down on fentanyl, making sure our borders are stronger. Look, nobody thinks that illegal immigration is appropriate.
Now, for socialists, for actual economic socialists, this is an essential thing you have to do, because economic isolationism is the only way you can keep industry in the country when the corporate tax rate is a bajillion %. So I do enjoy that. However, it's kind of funny. In 2020, when he was on the stage with Democrat primary opponents, when the moderator asked which of the candidates by the raise of their right hand would support giving illegal aliens, so people who immigrated into the country legally, taxpayer-funded health insurance, he was one of the people that raised his hand and didn't criticize immigration during the Biden administration. How about that? The best part of the entire thing, though, is when Karl asked him about Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who is with him on this Fight the Oligarchy tour. She is also a representative in New York who is being asked to openly challenge Schumer. It is, in fact, national news. It's a very reasonable question that any journalist on the left or the right would ask of Bernie Sanders. And here's how he responded.
Back when I first came to the Congress and the House, I helped form the Progressive Caucus. We had 5 people at that time. Now they got close to 100. So you got a whole lot of good people. Alexandria is extraordinary. I am so impressed by her work in Congress and she inspires young people all over the country.
Would you like to see her joining the Senate?
Right now, we have, as I said, just a whole lot of people in the Congress. Okay, Jonathan, thanks.
Wait, I got one more. This is important.
No, I asked you.
Okay.
You want to do nonsense, do nonsense.
No.
I don't want to talk about inside the Beltway stuff. I got 32,000 people.
I was just asking you about AOC because she was out there with you.
Fine, but I don't want to talk about this. What was the last question?
I was going to ask you one more question about you. I mean, that's all. I was literally your last.
What is your question?
Well, I mean, it's easier to say.
I love it so much. He can't handle the question that everyone is asking, because then Bernie would actually have to split the Democrats down the ticket the way that they did in the 1850s. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit about this scintillating scandal between good old Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth. And, oh man, the comments are coming in fast and furious, and just can't believe, the horrible terribleness. It is going to be wild stuff. There is one final story, though, that I do want to mention. It is regarding NPR over the weekend, something that was very near and dear to my heart. So NPR brought on a domestic terrorism expert to talk about the targeted firebombing of Teslas, Tesla chargers, Tesla dealerships, of doxing or releasing information to people that own Teslas. And the individual who was their expert says, this might be really surprising to a lot of your listeners, but, and then they paraphrased, yeah, it is domestic terrorism, which is not really hiding the ball at all when you admit that your audience probably wouldn't see a genuine act of domestic terror to invoke political change through intimidation as an incident of domestic terror. So NPR is just doing wonderfully. We'll be back in a second with the radio crew. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
It's It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
All right, here's the part of the show where I get on probably some people's nerves. I'm just going to come right out and say it, be real upfront with a lot of you out there, whether you're joining us on the radio syndication network, whether you're joining us via TV or on the podcast, or my personal favorite, the YouTube and X live streams. There was a bit of a scandal, a scandalous kind of scandal that was posted by The Atlantic, in which Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief, wrote the headline, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans." Ooh. Now, this is the second time the media have flipped out about war plans. There was a rumor a couple of days ago that Elon Musk was being brought into the Pentagon for a big, huge war plan, top secret war plan meeting about China. And that turned out to be completely bogus. So that's red flag number one. The war plan thing is a little curious. Now, I have friends who have criticized this as a major, massive, incredible blunder from the Trump administration, that what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to go through this article here. We'll break it down piece by piece, that this happened. People should be fired. This is an outrage. Pete Buttigieg calls it a bleeping disgrace. People should be canned. Chuck Schumer's out there saying, this is the worst intelligence leak I've read about in a very long time, which is hilarious considering that President Barack Obama and President Joe Biden, or whoever was handling Joe Biden's corpse, would telegraph, and by telegraph I mean openly announce, whenever the United States was about to make any military strike whatsoever, in North Africa, in the Middle East, anywhere, with like 72 hours of notice. So if you were, let's say, a Yemeni Houthi, let's say you were a member of the Taliban that just retook Afghanistan after Biden's disastrous pullout, you would simply clear the area for 72 hours until the United States sent, a couple $1 million worth of JDAMs crashing down on the buildings in the area, and then you just come right back. So Chuck Schumer going, this intelligence leak is insane, I can't believe it, is a little wild. So here is what happened according to Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic. So he says that the world found out shortly before 2 p.m. Eastern time on March 15th that the United States was bombing Houthi targets across Yemen. He said, I, however, knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. This plan included precise information about weapon packages, targets, and timing. This is going to require some explaining. Okay, so red flag number one when you're reading a story like this, when things do not add up, you don't have to discredit the entire story, but something is not right here. Something is not right here because as we are going to read, we do not have any evidence that all of the precise military plans and war plans and all the kinds of things that Goldberg is alleging took place. Number two, he says, Hegseth texted me these plans, which is kind of fudging it a little bit. Again, in the interest of fairness, we're going to go through it and talk about it because some things just don't add up. So he says the story technically begins, then he gives the history of the Houthis and Gaza and Hamas and whatever. Then he says that he was added late on, let me make sure I get this right. On Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Waltz, the national security spokesman from the White House, and Mike Waltz, right? He said, Signal is an open source encrypted, blah, 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 blah. Signal is a private messaging application that encrypts it's an end-to-end encryption service trying to make sure that messages and connections are private. You can also set things to disappearing. We talked about this on the last episode about Mayor Johnston of Denver and setting messages to delete. So we're familiar with Signal here. Now, he joins this group chat to this connection request 2 days later, Thursday at 4:28 p.m. It was called Houthi PC Small Group. So Michael Waltz then tells the group, according to Jeffrey Goldberg, that they're establishing a principal group for coordination on the Houthis And he's talking about getting things ready to go, et cetera, et cetera. And then 1 minute later, Marco Rubio chimes in, JD Vance chimes in, like some other people chime in that are senior officials in the Trump administration. And at first, Goldberg claims he thought this was like a fake out. Like it was like a disinformation campaign from the Trump administration. He couldn't believe that they would let him into this group chat. He said the next day, things got even stranger. At 8:05 a.m. on Friday, Michael Waltz texted the group. Basically, they started talking about the policies in play in the Middle East and how other countries would react and like how things are going and what everyone was up to that day. And JD Vance made fun of Europe and complained that Europe isn't actually kind of worth anything on the international stage economically. There's a little bit of disagreement on some foreign policy stuff. And then Goldberg claims, he makes the claim that Pete Hegseth shared a complete war plan operation that he doesn't post the picture of online. And he says that this kind of special military operation, the details of which could, if given to the wrong people, like result in the death and destruction of United States forces and just throw the whole world into chaos. And then 2 hours later, the Houthi strike happened that he was talking about. So some things are just a little bit wrong here, a little bit struggling, a little bit wrong. First of all, he being Jeffrey Goldberg, posts a couple of the messages to the group in which, again, you see JD Vance making fun of Europe, and they kind of talk a little bit about the Houthis and like how other nations are going to handle things. While Jeffrey Goldberg claims that he received the war plan the night before, like the big super duper war plan the night before that's supposed to be the war plan of this attack, he also claims that he didn't know anything about the Yemen attack until 2 hours before the attack. So those two details do not line up. We can't compare the messages because Goldberg didn't share those. He shared like little loose snippets. Now, there are three popular theories at the moment. Popular theory number one is that this was a massive blunder from the Trump administration and people need to be fired because some guy without security clearance was let in and he found all of this super secret, like top military intelligence that has all of our super duper war plans. And any of you who have served or any of you who have trained as a cadet and you've read about OPORD, an operational order, the standard 5-paragraph operational order outlined in how a plan is carried out, know that what Jeffrey Goldberg described as a super duper military plan, no, that's not at all how a military plan works. And saying, hey, in 2 hours, we're going to strike someone. Is that secret information? Yeah, that's secret information. Is that super top secret, ultra like classified? It's going to put all Americans at risk info? No, it's not. If you don't think that after that strike that the U.S. naval vessels that either served as the landing pad for those particular jets or served as the carriers that launched the missiles that struck Houthi targets, you don't think that those either carriers or cruisers moved? Come now, my dear Watson, that's not how things work. Now, the second popular theory is that this was actually a masterful kind of misinformation campaign to show the world that the United States makes fun of Europe behind closed doors. I don't know if I particularly buy onto that theory, but it's a little unlikely, just a smidgen unlikely, that no one noticed that Jeffrey Goldberg joined the chat. And I'm going to explain why over on the live stream, considering we've already talked about Signal. Radio Crew C in a second, it's the Tony Kinnett Cast. Okay, we've talked about Signal here before. Whenever you join a Signal group chat, there is a notification that hits you. And I know because just this evening, I asked Tyler O'Neill at the Daily Signal to add our political editor, Bradley Devlin, to one of our Daily Signal, like our really old Daily Signal chats, because we don't use, at least I don't use Signal a ton. And when he added Bradley, I got this little notification and it says, Tyler added one person to the group. And I can actually click on that and see who it was. If you're telling me that no one noticed that Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, no friend to this administration, was a part of that chat, I find that a little hard to believe. Could it have happened? Yes. Did it happen? I don't know yet. Now, another particular problem here is the idea that Jeffrey Goldberg also took screenshots from this application. If you take screenshots on Signal, depending on the group settings, it could notify the rest of the group, like on Snapchat or Instagram or other messaging services, hey, this person took a screenshot of the chat with their phone. That's also a little bit weird. Now, there are ways around that. Just letting you know, that's also a possibility. Now, those things all said, there's a third theory that I think is more likely. And I do smell something a little bit wrong with this. I am starting to kind of lean more towards the Jeffrey Goldberg was added on purpose, mainly because when the White House or the Department of Defense was reached out to for comment about the messages, they didn't respond with no comment. They said, yeah, those messages look real to us, but we're looking into it. I don't know a lot of PR campaigns or comms offices that do that. That's unusual. Also, Mike Waltz being the guy that does this, again, one of the more competent members, at least as far as tech is concerned in the administration. It's just a real blunder for Waltz to make here. I don't know of any Jeffrey G's or J. Goldbergs that are associated with the Trump administration or the upper levels of the Department of Defense. That should, just be noted. A friend of mine over at the White House whom I texted today also said, not no one that I know. So a little strange for that particular blunder, but let's say Jeffrey Goldberg is one number digit off. If Waltz was typing in the number via cell phone, just offhand, there's one digit that's different. Mistype, Goldberg is now in the chat instead of this other dude, whatever. I got to be honest with you, folks, boys, girls, and squirrels. This just looks like a minor mistake that is, in fact, yes, a mistake. It is indeed a little bit of a scandal, and that would be a mistake. It shouldn't have happened. However, is this like a massive scandal of, oh no, U.S. intelligence spread throughout the rafters? Oh my gosh, the terror. No. I've read the article, top to bottom. I've read all of the messages that Jeffrey Goldberg has shared. I've looked at the details that Goldberg puts next to one another. It's really embellished. It looks embellished. In a casual meeting between senior objectives, you guys know they don't share like the master plan to each other. Have any of you ever been in a group chat with others who are in charge the day before the operation takes place and you're like, by the way, guys, here's the entire op order of the entire operation? It doesn't work like that. It sounded like just a last minute, hey, last call in case anyone wasn't aware. This is the times. We're 2 hours out. Let's go get them. And then there was an American flag emoji, like a punching emoji. I'm just saying that I'm still waiting to uphold final judgment, but I'm just not seeing the horrible, embarrassing scandal that everyone else seems to be. We're going to pick up the radio crew and bring on Hans von Spakovsky on some Supreme Court stuff. It's going to be a hoot. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
One line of cases the Supreme Court has to see, and you and I both know that we're going to be getting into more Supreme Court cases than you can shake a stick at. So we're going to break them down one by one. And to start, we've got Hans von Spakovsky, a man whose name is not only incredibly fun to say, but he is a very brilliant scholar over at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast, by the way, Hans. It's always good to have you.
Tony, thanks for having me.
So let's dig right into this. We've got a Louisiana redistricting case.
Right.
I've heard every kind of accusation thrown around. Can you break it down a little bit for us?
Sure. It's not actually that hard a case to understand. The state did new boundary lines for its congressional districts. In 2022, it has 6 congressional districts. Mm-hmm. One of those 6 is designated as what's called a majority-minority district to satisfy parts of the Voting Rights Act. That's a district in which black voters are actually a majority, so they'll be able to elect their candidate of choice. But they got sued. NAACP and others sued them saying, oh, well, yeah, you gave us 1 out of 6. You should have given us 2 out of the 6 congressional districts. You should have created a second one in which black voters could elect their candidate of choice. Now, they claimed that the legislature was acting in a discriminatory fashion. Their evidence on that was pretty much non-existent. Really, the basis for their claim was proportionality. You know, what they said was black voters are about a third of the population of Louisiana, therefore we ought to get 2 of the 6 seats. Yeah,
some kind of weird racial apportionment argument.
Yes.
Do they know how it sounds, or is this just me?
No, I mean, that was the essence of their arguments, but they tried claiming discrimination. Now, the problem with that claim is that the Supreme Court has said on prior occasions that is not a basis for a lawsuit under the Voting Rights Act. And in fact, the Voting Rights Act very specifically says that you cannot file a claim under the Voting Rights Act based on that proportionality argument. But in any event, they got a court to agree with them. So the legislature went back, drew up a new congressional district map for the state. And this time they did create 2 black congressional districts. But they got sued again, this time by voters saying, the only factor you used in drawing up that second district was race, and you can't do that. And in fact, another court said, you know, you're right, that violates what the U.S. Supreme Court said in an old case called Reno versus Shaw, in which the Supreme Court said, well, race can be one of many factors you may take into account when you're drawing new boundary lines, but it can't be the prominent factor. If you do, that violates the one person, one vote standard of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Doctrine.
Yeah, because we get into some really weird places really quickly. I mean, at least in far as 2025, New Mexico has the highest Hispanic population as a percentage of its total population, just under 50%. So we're saying that half of New Mexico's congressional districts have to be majority Hispanic because they're going to assume, well, you know, Hispanic people would all vote the same. It's so it's a mix of antiquated and just goofy.
But it's also very discriminatory. Look, the Reno versus Shaw case where the court said you couldn't do that, the state of North Carolina had basically created a black district that looked like a barbell. It was these 2 large black areas of the state connected by what ran in between them? The interstate.
Yeah, that very thin bridge, exactly.
Yeah, and this second district they created in Louisiana is very similar to that. At one point, it stretches between these 2 black districts, something like over 200 miles apart, and the line at its widest, I think, is about a mile wide. So clearly, in my opinion anyway, they have once again violated prior Supreme Court precedent, and hopefully the Supreme Court will rule in favor of the voters who brought this lawsuit.
Do you know what it actually reminds me of when I look at the map? And I'll go ahead and have the editor throw it on screen. It reminds me of a map of Croatia in Europe. I mean, it's like this weird sea that goes around and then comes back around. And it is, first of all, I live in the 6th Indiana. All right. I have very little in common with someone in Columbus, Indiana, which is the southern portion of that particular district. And I'm in the eastern central side of the state. And yet still, you know, it kind of works as a functional district. I'm trying to imagine how you would have a functional district in which you leave your house, you walk through another congressional district to reach the chair, the office of your own congressperson. I mean, it really does reek of discrimination. I know it's an age-old comparison to make, but can you imagine the horror of a district manipulated to be a white-only or white majority district? Yes. I mean, it would be rightly scorned.
It was, but look, Croatia, that's actually a good comparison because what the folks who brought the original lawsuit, really what they want to do, these are the folks that said you have to create a second district. They really want to balkanize the United States. And they want to balkanize us and divide us by race. That's the only important factor to them in the redistricting process. They don't seem to believe that people who, for example, live in the same city might have the same interests in how the local government represents them, even if they come from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. The folks pushing this idea, they just don't believe that. They think your race defines how you think.
You know, I was a teacher flying with one of my grandparents down to, I think it was flying over to Florida, and we had a layover in Atlanta. And when I was in Atlanta, I was standing in this long line at a Popeyes, and there was a black gentleman in front of me who was from New England, and he spoke like it. I mean, you know, the whole Harvard cop, Hawkyard kind of a situation. Right. And the lady who was also black, who was a server, who was actually walking up the line taking orders on paper bags, was from Atlanta. And although they looked the same, they had a lot of trouble communicating with each other. And so I had to step in, having a little Southern drawl in my background myself. And I got to, you know, do a little communication translation there. And it's amazing to me to think that the NAACP might actually consider two individuals from two completely different cultures part of that same, like you call that necessity of balkanization into racial groups, despite having next to nothing in common with each other. It's insulting.
No, it is. But, you know, what's most important about this Louisiana case is that it's time when we do redistricting, it's time to get away from considering race at all. And that's obviously what was going on when these lines were drawn. It was drawn at the urging of the Biden Justice Department, the NAACP, and all these, frankly, radical left-wing groups who want race to be the predominant factor in politics. And if there's anything this recent election showed, it's people are tired of that. They don't want that anymore.
So the kind of the latter question that I have here is on some of the recent disparity between some of the more originalist justices on the Supreme Court. And I know that there have been concerns, probably more prevalent to other cases, but you know, maybe it's befitting that I get used to asking this question if we're reviewing SCOTUS cases over the next couple of months. Do you see justices like Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett holding to more of an originalist perspective on this, or maybe as originalist as one can in the upholding of this law? Or do you maybe see a more siding with liberal justices? How do you hear it going so far, as much as you can tell us?
Look, I think the best example of what's going on here is a decision we had about 2 weeks ago. You may have seen that a lower court judge told the Trump administration that it had to pay out $2 billion in USAID money and ordered the administration to do it within 36 hours. That went up on an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to take the case. You had a 5-4 decision. It was Chief Justice Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, siding with the three liberals.
Right.
They didn't say that on the merits that this was okay for the judge to do, but he refused to take the appeal, saying, we're going to let this work its way through the lower courts, then we'll look at it. The 4 conservative justices, led by Alito, wrote a stinging dissent.
The most, and I don't mean acrid as an insult, but I mean acrid as in its potency. It was one of the spiciest. I mean, it made me want to lean back and say, my stars. You read that dissent. It was incredible.
It was. But the point that Alito was making was we shouldn't wait for the process going through the lower courts, because it's so basically outrageous that a federal district court thought it had the unchecked power to do this, that the Supreme Court should have stepped in. That's the dividing line going on right now. And I hope that the Chief Justice and Amy Coney Barrett realize that with dozens and dozens and dozens of injunctions being issued all over the country, this sitting back and waiting for these cases to work their way through the lower court process is the wrong thing to do. The court's got to step in, not in a single case, and not only talk about that case, but also, in essence, tell the other courts, you've got to stop doing this. You have to stick to the standards for issuing an injunction, which none of these other courts are doing. I hope there is a change of mind by the Chief Justice on this.
I agree. And I think that the best analogy for this, as I often try to frame, is like a minor car problem. There might be a little something wrong with, your car's engine, and it can still drive. And you may not think that that particular problem is enough of a reason to get it fixed right away. But if you let that problem persist, that minor problem, right, it might affect other things in the car. It might cause damage while you're waiting to take it to the mechanic to getting it fixed. And that's really how I see a lot of these court cases. By these federal judges running amok and issuing these national injunctions and stays and freezes and whatever else outside of their authority, they're creating not just a legal mess, but a mess all throughout how the government functions, how law is interpreted, how laws are carried out. And that kind of chaos is not something to be admired in the name of, I don't know what you would say, legal patience. How would you?
Judicial. No, I agree with you. And actually, your car analogy is a good one, and that's why the Supreme Court has got to take one of these cases on one of these emergency appeals and step in and stop it. We may have the next case kind of on the way, as you know. The Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia is hearing arguments again on an emergency stay to stop the federal judge in Manhattan who told the president, you have to bring all these Venezuelan criminal gangbangers back to the U.S. And I hope the Court of Appeals acts, but if they don't, that's going to get appealed to the Supreme Court, and that's when the Chief Justice will have another opportunity to step in and stop this kind of behavior.
Absolutely. Before Commander-in-Chief and 6-star General Boasberg makes any more international decisions. Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative, senior legal fellow over at the Edwin Meese III Center at the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate your taking a moment and stopping by and walking us through this.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back. Welcome. We've started a little bit of a segment on this show in which Reeve, a new producer on the team over in DC, finds the most brutal, horrible, terrible, awful clips that I'm told I'm going to hate. And, I've got I didn't particularly care for the last batch that I was forced to sit down and watch, but apparently some of y'all did. So now, welcome to another segment of political memes and suffering, because it never stops. I'm told, Allison, though, that you can rest easy, producer Allison, over on the radio board. These have all been vetted for swearing, so you don't have to keep your hand hovered over the censor button this time. So, all right, first one up. I'd keep your hand over it anyway, just in case, Al.
Did you know, however, there is a gender identity that is linked to the seasons? This is called gender season. And this is a gender identity I've only just learnt about. It's a micro-identity. It's not an identity that I have ever heard discussed before. It's a new one for me. Gender season is an individual who explores their gender identity in relation to a season or all the seasons. So this might be somebody whose gender expression and identity is linked to one season. So for example, winter. Or this might be somebody whose gender identity and expression changes depending on the season.
Yeah, that was awful. So for those of you in the radio world, I want you to picture someone who changed their identity into a packet of Bubble Yum bubblegum. And that's exactly what she looked like. Anyway, I don't... Now, there's so many jokes that I want to make regarding changing your gender in the seasons. I'm going to try to keep it just in the scorn of, oh, dear heavens. Yeah, that's what we needed. Changes with the seasons. It's fall, so I've decided that I identify as having testicles this year. It's going to be a great year, everyone. Happy autumn. All right. Next. Why? So for those who are watching, or excuse me, listening and not watching, it's a video of one of the Elon Musk dealership protests. And other than there are like two teenage dudes, all of the rest of them are middle-aged women, because of course they are. I don't know what it is with wine moms and like the desperate desire to get out in front of everyone and embarrass yourselves, but you really don't have to. You don't have to do that. Just drink your wine in your home and maybe read a book. I don't know. Just some decent advice for the folks out there. This next one, it just says food stamps. I am very, very concerned.
Okay, y'all just mad because I get 3 canned food stamps. So what? I get all kind of snacks while I'm sitting here chilling or whatever, paying no bills. No bills. I'm on government assistance. My son back there with his snacks. Government assistance, 3 canned food.
I just don't think that that's the best argument to chuck out there in favor of food stamps still paying for junk food and like soda and stuff. I don't know, having someone go out there and going, I'm not paying any bills, and then sticking out their tongue that's the wrong color is concerning. And then like just digging in and saying, yeah, we're not paying any bills and we're on government assistance. Here's all of our junk food. I don't know if that's making the argument you think that it's making. Move right along here. Ugh, goodness gracious. Just sending our best and brightest, aren't we? Okay, so for those, again, who are listening and not watching, and now I have the context. Oh, that's useful. So this is a lady who apparently left her kid in the car with like the doors locked for a long time. And so I guess the kid was like waving or whatever. And so a driver showed up and like tried to take a picture of the license plate. So what do these two rational ladies do? Well, what any rational person would do when you see someone taking a photo of your license plate, you run up on their car and you break the windshield and you start stamping on it. And then you yell at the person in the passenger seat who just recorded your face because you're stupid. And so then you push them away after you swear at them, and then you run back to your car. I don't know what anyone's saying. I think those on the left have, exceptional mothering ability. I don't know why anyone would suggest that, that kind of nonsense isn't endearing. Give them the old Casey Anthony special. Just disgusting. This last one here says, it's your favorite. Oh, no.
I think that you punch. I think you punch. I think you're okay with you okay with punching. I think, and I love Colin, and I think towards the end he started to punch a little harder. But, it's Ted Cruz. I mean, this dude has to be knocked over the head, hard, right? There is no niceties with him, at all. You go clean off on him, right?
Okay. So that's Jasmine Crockett of Texas, suggesting that people need to get in there and throw some punches. Now, I think it's clear she's being metaphorical. She's saying, you get in a debate, you got to start throwing punches. That's an analogy that I have made quite a bit. But given that Jasmine Crockett has now made several violent metaphors over the last couple of weeks, I just want somebody to check in on her. And that's not a metaphor. I hope that she gets the help that she needs, because leaning over and doing the weird laugh while making a bunch of metaphors like the Catch Me Outside girl from Dr. Phil. Everyone's just kind of looking at her awkwardly. You're just kind of embarrassed to be watching it. And you're just kind of acting really strange. Personally, this is just me. I don't know that I would, as a representative, get out there and act like that. It seems as though one could not be absolutely embarrassing. No, that's the whole advice. Yeah, it seems like one could not be absolutely embarrassing. So just don't. Why? These clips are terrible, Reeve. Why would you do this to us? Why would you do this to us? There's another one she said, but she didn't get it censored in time. Well, Allison, I'm absolutely not going to do that to you. Well, we're coming up on the 300th episode of the show. It's been quite a time. We've gone through syndication. We've gone through putting the show across several different platforms. And we have something special planned for the 300th. And all I'm going to tease right now is that with 10 episodes to go, it's going to be a doozy. The 200th episode was a lot of fun. I think I remember that it was a good time. So we'll have some good stuff. Maybe we'll be on location somewhere. There is some interesting, perhaps we'll be doing this from a particularly famous building in a certain capital of the United States. We'll see. There's some cool stuff in the works that we've got for y'all here on the Tony Kinnett Cast, as well as on the Daily Signals YouTube channel. But alas, we'll talk about that a little bit more on the morrow. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate y'all. We'll tell you to take care. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.